This was yeah, words. Hello everybody, my name is Kelsey and we're about to get very, very nerdy with my June wrap up. So June was pretty similar to May when it comes to the amount of books that I read. I really had a very specific thing that I was doing and like a very specific mood that I was kind of in, which I kind of talked a little bit about in my TBR for July. So if you've seen that, you know what I'm talking about. But I kind of really got into that fantasy romance mood, which I've been in for a while, but it really it happened. In June, I had some reading plans, so you guys have probably seen a couple of the reading vlogs that I've done. I think I only really did one for the month of June. So I had some things that derailed my TBR, and I didn't really know what to expect when it came to June. So also I was on vacation for a bunch of it. So I really didn't read a whole lot, but what I did read, I did enjoy, and I did get through some of the books that were on my summer TBR, which is one that I've been really trying to focus on in the last couple of months or so. So without further ado, let's dive into the stats, because I read 8 books. Of those 8 books, I read about 3,531 pages, which is about 79.5-ish hours listened. And that was over 2 audiobooks, 1 ebook, 3 physical books, and 2 mixed books. My age categories were kind of pretty normal-ish for me. We had 2 YA, 1 new adult, and 5 adult books. Genres were pretty normal for me. We had 5 romance, 2 fantasy, and 1 contemporary. And ratings were a little bit different-ish this month. We had 2 5 stars, 4 4 stars, and 2 3 stars. The first book that I finished in the month of June was actually my May Lorraine Heath book. We're about a month behind. We just keep not finishing them in the month that we plan, which is totally fine. We're still reading them, and that's what matters. But this one was Tesas Destiny by Lorraine Heath, and this is the second book in the Texas series by this author. It's a trilogy, so we're about halfway through it. It follows 3 different brothers. This one followed Dallas, and it does follow directly. Well, not directly. It's been quite a few years since the first book, but as far as the events, you need the first book to kind of set up this book, which when you have companion kind of historical romance series like this, you really don't need them to go one after the other. It just kind of sets off the romance from the previous book. So you'll see the couple from the previous book in the current one, but this one, the events of the first one really do set in motion kind of what happens in the second book. So this one follows Dallas, like I mentioned, and he is looking for a wife, and he basically has this fight for land. He's got a lot of land, and he's kind of creating a town in Texas, and he has a fight with another family, and in order to solve it, he basically offers to marry their daughter, or the sister, whoever it is in the family, and it's their relationship, and it is tough. This is very much not the happiest of stories. So trigger warnings for this book are sexual assault and miscarriage, and not necessarily, if I remember correctly, on the page, but talked a lot about, but there's just something about this author's writing that it makes me hooked. Her character development is amazing, because like I said when I talked about the first book in the series, when you get to historical romances, sometimes it can feel very surface level when it comes to some of the character development, but with these books you really feel like they are full-fledged people, and you can see that from page 1, which I loved about this. And I loved our main 2 characters. I will say this one does have the miscommunication trope within it, but it makes sense as to why it's that way. Just some of the events that take place in this book, it just makes sense for the plot, for the characters, for the time period they're in, that kind of stuff, for that to occur. So this one didn't bother me. I know miscommunication is a lot of people's least favorite tropes, or one of theirs, and I don't like it if it's not done well, and this one I feel like was done well because it made sense for the time period and everything like I just mentioned. So this one worked, in my opinion, really well, but just wanted to kind of put that out there so that if anyone is going to dive into this one, just know that that one's coming your way. But I really loved these characters. I loved watching them grow. This one did kind of wrap up kind of quickly, I will say. So I was at the last chapter, and then all of a sudden we were at the end, and I was very surprised. And there's one thing that happened in the epilogue that I feel like would have been more powerful if it hadn't have happened, but that's just nitpicking at this point. I gave it 4 stars. I really enjoyed the series, and I can't wait to read the 3rd book in the series, which is called Texas Splendor, and this one is about the 3rd son, or 3rd brother, Austin. So this one has a lot of, like, Dallas is the oldest in the family. He's the one who's kind of taking care of everything. He has a very specific idea of what he thinks his life's going to be and what he thinks love should look like and that kind of stuff. So it's a lot of growing with him and our female lead. So I really enjoyed it. I thought it worked well. I love their romance. I love their story. I love this time period, which is weird because, again, Westerns shouldn't like it, but I do. And I just really like this family. I think it's really sweet. And Lorraine's Heath's writing is really, really growing on me. She's becoming a favorite, honestly, and I think I'm just so excited that this is how I'm feeling about her first few books, and like the fact that we have so many more books to continue, and she has quite a few more books that are in the like Regency Victorian kind of time period. So I'm just so excited that this is where we're starting. It's such a good start. Next one that I picked up was the 2nd volume of Fence, and this is a series that follows basically a fencing team in a college, and it's not like the most plot heavy thing. Like, literally the point, at least of the first 2 volumes so far, has been this group of people fighting each other for a spot on the team. That's it. I think there's only like 5 or 6 volumes total, so like the point of this is them just like fighting each other, and there's a little bit of like their life outside of it, but it was just, there shouldn't be anything like crazy exciting about this one, and I can't stop reading it. It's just a series that is fascinating to me, and I don't know why. I cannot put my finger on why this works so well, but it does, and I'm like obsessed with the series, and it's very fascinating. We are starting to see some cracks in some of our characters' armor, so we're getting to see a little bit more into who they are, which I really appreciate. This one really follows 2 guys. I mean, it's the whole team. You do get the whole team, but 2 guys specifically. You've got one who is pretty well bred and comes from like a fencing family and is like the #1 in every single competition. And then you've also got another guy who is pretty good at fencing, but he comes from a harder background. He does not come from money, so he is fighting for his place on the team, because if he gets his place, he can have a scholarship to this college university, but if he doesn't get on the team, then his scholarship goes away and he can't go to it. And they fought in a duel. Not a duel, that makes it sound very Victorian. They fought in a competition a while before this book starts. It's like the very, very beginning of the 1st volume, and the guy who wins everything won, and the other guy has vowed to, you know, get him. And of course they go to the same college and they're roommates, so you do have their relationship a little bit. It's very enemies right now. There's absolutely no friendship going on, so I don't know where we're going to go with this story. I've got ideas of where I think it should go, but I don't actually know if it's going to make it that way. But that's kind of where we're at with the story, is them just, again, fighting each other. Not a lot plot-wise has happened, and again, I think the art style is beautiful, but I can't figure out why this story calls to me. But it does, and I'm invested, and I am going to continue to read this. I'm very excited to see what other things go. It's a really easy one to just like slip in between maybe some fantasy books. Like, I've got my very heavily fantasy TBR for July, so maybe I'll slip this one, the 3rd one, in during one of those kind of breaks between books. But they're just really fun, easy books that I can get really invested in, and I don't know why, but I am heavily invested in this series. Makes no sense. The next book is part of the vlog that I put out. It's the 2nd in my recommendations kind of series, where you guys recommended books to me and I'm reading your recommendations. So I have a couple of those books that I read in the month of July. The first one was A Kingdom of Flesh and Fire by Jennifer L. Armentrout. This is the 2nd book in the From Blood and Ash series, and I finally did it, guys. I finally read it. It took me way too long. I put it on so many TBRs. I don't know if you can see this, the amount of tabs within this book, but I loved this. I gave it 5 stars. I rave about it in that video way more, but this story follows our main character Poppy, who is the maiden. And basically what that means is that she's going to be given to the gods. She doesn't know what that means. We as readers don't really know what that means, but it's set in this world where she's basically going to ascend to the gods, and she's not quite sure what that is, but she is heavily protected. She basically wears face coverings and all white all the time. Only a handful of people are allowed to see her without her face covering, and that's like the Duke that's in charge of her housemaid person, and then like her bodyguard, I think, and the head of the army or something like that. Like there's basically like 4 or 5 people who are allowed to see her actual face. So she's hidden a lot of the time. And in the first book, a lot of the events start when she gets a new bodyguard and things progress. This takes place directly, like literally directly after the first book, with a huge cliffhanger. It ended again on a huge cliffhanger. So I am emotionally not prepared to let this one go. I'm probably gonna have to pick up the third one soon. I'll also said that about the first one, and here we are a year later. But I really enjoyed this. One thing I found really interesting about this series is that the first book in this series is a fantasy series, and the fantastical elements, I don't want to say anything about them like everyone else doesn't, because it definitely spoils the first one. There's definitely like a bigger reveal that is tied into the fantasy elements of this world in the first book. So the first book focuses on the plot and kind of setting up this world a little bit and then revealing whatever that big thing is. This one is significantly more world building and character development. It is a lot of relationships between Poppy and our main male lead, and then we also have a lot of world building as Poppy has been kind of given this big reveal at the end of the first book. She's kind of grappling with that and starting to relearn some things. So we have a lot of world building where it's expanded upon because Poppy is learning a lot of things. So it's not very plot heavy, but I couldn't stop reading it because of all the fun moments between Poppy and our main character, our main male character. I love them so much, and I just love their banter and their conversations, and they are just so cute together, and I really, really enjoy them as a couple. So it was fun to see that kind of go from the very beginning stages that we saw in the first book to a significantly more deeper stage within this book, especially with some stuff that has gone down. So I really enjoyed this. I got 5 stars. I really loved that world building. I really loved learning along with Poppy because it was kind of like relearning what you thought you knew about the world, which wasn't a whole lot. So that was kind of fun. And I felt like I tabbed a lot within this book because I knew that those were really big world building type moments. I'm really excited about the fourth one, or the third one, and then the fourth one in the series. I only have the first 3. So I know there's going to be 6 in the series, but I've read somewhere, and if you know, please tell me if I'm wrong, because I need confirmation on this, that the first 4 are one arc, and then everything else is just added on. I think there are going to be 6 books total, and I feel like she just announced the 6th one. So I don't know if I'm correct. I know there's like a side story as well that follows a different set of characters in the same world, which I'm very interested in as well, but I think I want that to come out all the way before I start that one. But in my head, I've got it that the first 4 are one arc, and then the others are just kind of like added on stories, a little bit like ACOTAR is, where the first 3 are one arc, and then you have added on stories. I don't even know if I've just made that up or if that's true, but I'm very invested in this. I want to continue. I need to pick up the 4th one at some point. It's not going to match my beautiful Fairy Loot editions, but that's fine. I will just suffer. But I gave this 5 stars. It was amazing. I was really worried because the first one was so good, but I was hooked within like 50 pages of this book. I was immediately invested in what was going on again. So I'm really excited about the 3rd one. I've heard some things about the 3rd one. Now that I've gone through the 2nd one, I'm realizing that the 3rd one is the one that I've heard some interesting things about, where some people didn't like it as much. So I'm really nervous and excited about that one, but since I love the 2nd one basically the same amount as the first one, I am less worried and more excited about that one. Next one I picked up was I Love You, I Hate You, and this is by Uni. This is an adult manga, one volume manga that basically follows a woman who's a manager and her assistant of sorts. Maybe not. Maybe just like a professional. She's like the manager of the other girl. And one of them's married, and they have like basically an affair with each other. I think this one 3 stars because I feel like there was some important conversations in here. First off, I'm not the target audience, I don't think, for this, because there's definitely some stuff that was going on in here that I liked the idea of this female-female relationship, especially in this world. You don't see a lot of mangas that focus, at least I don't see a lot of mangas that focus on same-sex couples. So the fact that this was one I thought was really important. I'm sure there's some people out there that have read this and it has really impacted them. I just find it kind of boring, first off. Second off, the romance was very one-sided in my opinion. The assistant person, she's not an assistant, but I can't think of what her actual title is, but she felt like she was giving a lot of love and putting a lot into this relationship, and the other one, who was married, was barely putting anything in. And so I was sitting here going, why are they even a thing if she's not been giving anything back, you know? So there was just a lot about this that was very surface level. I felt like we didn't dive into the story very much. There was a lot of timeline switches that kind of got confusing after a while, because it did show how as you kind of are going through the series, it shows, or the volume, it does show how the romance between these two women started. So like that was fine, but later on they did do some flashbacks of early dates with them, and I couldn't figure out what was an early date and what was like the present day. So like that got a little confusing. We do have some conversations where we have our main character, the one who's married, you know, having conversations with her husband and her mother-in-law, which they both think that she should have very stereotypical gender role kind of role in the marriage, and like the fact that maybe they don't have kids yet, and so she's thinking about whether or not she really wants kids. That's a big no for him and his mom. And so like there's a lot of societal pressure on her as well. So there is some conversations that I think are really important, and what I found really interesting that was touched upon. Overall, the plot, very, very boring. I just didn't really see a whole lot of, I don't know, like it just kind of felt very surface level for me. So I did give it 3 stars because there were some important conversations and I did enjoy some of this, but there are other parts of it that I was just like, this is kind of just okay. So I am going to unhaul this now that I've read it. Someone else can probably appreciate it way more than I can, but I am glad I read this. So now I know. The next 3 books I'm going to do together because they are all in the same series, and that is The Hades Trials by Eliza Rayner and Rose Wilson. The first book in this was the final book in my recommendations vlog that I was just mentioning when I talked about the From Blood and Ash series. So this is the last book in that vlog, and it's the first in a trilogy, and I read it, and it was very addicting. So I continued, and then I ended up just finishing all 3 of these books because I found all of them on Audible, and they were all about 6 hours long. I think the books themselves I found on Kindle Unlimited, and they were about 200, 250 Kindle pages, so they were all relatively short. So this series basically follows, it's a Hades and Persephone retelling or reimagining, and it follows our main character Persephone, who is in the human world and basically gets kidnapped by Zeus and taken to be part of the Hades Trials. And the Hades Trials is basically Zeus's way of getting back at Hades for something and forcing him to pick a wife. And so he puts Persephone into the running. Fun fact, Persephone and Hades used to be married, and she used to be a goddess, but something happened and she wiped all her memories and basically became mortal and went to the human world. And so that's the twist there. What is interesting about this story is, well, first off, how addicting it is, because the writing itself, very mediocre. Like, there's nothing spectacular about the world development or the character. Actually, the character development was rather lacking within this book, but the plot was fascinating, and the idea of these trials and like watching Persephone go through all these trials was so fascinating. I mentioned it in my vlog, but one of the things that I found interesting was the types of trials. Like, you don't have what you would have your normal like strength trial, or she would be going through a maze, or they would test her stamina, and she'd be like forced to face her fear and like do certain things like that. But they also would throw in things like, because she's going to be a queen if she marries Hades, she has to be hospitable, and so they have a hospitality trial where she's basically solving like a few riddles while she is hosting a party, and so she can't lack in her hosting duties, but also she's on a time crunch because she's got all these riddles to solve. So that was really fascinating, and I thought the world itself was really fascinating, and for a book that was written so mediocre, I could really visualize this world, which is very bizarre. One thing that did suffer, I think, is the romance, because yes, they're super cute together. Yes, some of the scenes between them are very sweet, and I did have a good chunk of this book, The authors are relying heavily on the fact that you understand that they had a previous relationship. Even if Persephone doesn't remember it, they had a previous thing. And they're not building this relationship. They're not trying to prove to you that these people should be together. They're just kind of throwing a few fun scenes at you and trusting that you understand that these two people should be together because they used to be together. And so there's not a lot of work that goes into proving it to us as the reader that these two people are meant for each other. The authors relied pretty heavily on that element, which didn't work in my opinion, but they did have a lot of cute moments. I thought it was really interesting because it reminded me of the Bridge Kingdom in the sense of like, it's one story that's just broken up into 3 different parts, and so each book has a pretty big cliffhanger, which is why I wanted to continue, and also because they weren't a lot of effort to read. So this is really what derailed a lot of my TBR, because I was only planning on reading the first one, but I knew A, cliffhangers, I needed answers, and B, if I didn't continue with it now, I probably wasn't going to get around to it anytime soon, if ever. So I did continue with it, and it was good. Like, I'm glad I read it. It definitely scratch the itch of having a Hades and Persephone retelling. It's not my favorite Hades and Persephone retelling by any stretch of the imagination, but it did its job. I enjoyed my time reading it. I can now move on. You know, like, I've forgotten a lot of the story already, so it's not going to stick in my brain for very long, but I had a good time reading it while I was reading it, and that is what matters. The next book that I picked up, I fell into the hype and I read Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. This one, it got 5 stars from me. I understand the hype with this book. It was kind of on my radar anyway, because I read some things that if you like Sarah J. Maas's addictive writing style, this is going to be a book that you enjoy. I've heard things that if you like How to Train Your Dragons, which is a series of movies that, like, it is some of my favorite, like, peak content, you know, that you would like this book. I'm not a huge dragon person. Not that I try to steer clear of dragon related stories. They're usually super high fantasy books that I don't want to have to read. Like, they're just books that I'm usually not invested in. And now I get the hype around dragons. I understand. I do love this story. So this book is very hyped, but in my opinion, very much worth the hype, I think, because of the storytelling and the addictive writing style and everything. Like, I was hooked within 50 pages of starting this book, and I read this book because of my best friend, Lauren, who you guys have met many times. If we read the same book, we genuinely enjoy it about the same amount, but we don't ever steer towards the same types of things, if that makes any sense. So the fact that she was on board with this and was like, you must read this, made me very excited, and so I did. I finally picked it up for her, read this on the beach, and it became my personality. So this book basically follows our main character, Violet, and her mother is a general. I think she's pretty high up within this world, and they work and live in this war college. And basically, this college has many different sects of you kind of go towards a specific thing. Her father was a scribe, and so she has spent basically her entire life in the library with the other scribes, and that's what she is expected that she was going to do with her life. But her mother has different ideas, because both her brother and her sister were both writers, and that's the subsect that basically is the soldier of this world, where you bond with a dragon, and that dragon has certain powers, which means that you now have certain powers. It also means that you are literally bonded, like you are connected via minds with this dragon, and that helps you in battle, and it helps you to survive, and like there's a lot of stuff to it. But her mother was a writer, her sister and brother were a writer, so she has to be a writer, and her mother basically forces her to be a writer. And one thing that I didn't realize until about halfway through this book, which I think the rep within this was hidden pretty well. I basically listened to a review from Ashley from Violet Fiction, who read this, and she picked up on this and mentioned it, is that Violet has a chronic illness, and I didn't even process that. Now, I don't know how I didn't process that, because they're always talking about how weak she is, how fatigued she is. She always has aches in her body. She always wraps her knees specifically because her knees are really weak. And so all of those things are things that are against her, because being a dragon rider, you have to be fit, you have to be tough, you have to be able to fight on your own, you have to be able to ride a dragon. That I found really interesting, to see that representation within this book and see how the people around her deal with that. Also in this writing school, which I forgot to mention, is that there are a bunch of kids who were children of rebels, basically. They tried to start a coup of sorts a few years ago, and their parents are no longer living, and like the way that they're getting back at them is basically to make all of them become writers, whether or not they want to be a writer or not. And so when she gets to this war college subsect of writers, there's a guy named Zayden, who is like the head of the kid who's the head of like the coup, and they it's very enemies at the beginning. So if you like Reese from ACOTAR or Asriel from ACOTAR, to me Zayden is a mixture of those two people, and I loved this book. I have not tabbed a Kindle book that fast before. I even bought markers to like highlighters for books, so that whenever inevitably I get a physical copy, which I don't have and I haven't ordered yet because I'm honestly too scared to wait. So one of these days I'm going to order a copy of it, but I have it so that I can physically highlight the book. I have never wanted to highlight a book unless it was ACOTAR before. So I feel like that's saying something about how much this book has consumed me, and I really enjoyed the story. Yes, the story does have a lot of cliches in it when it comes to fantasy romances, and if that's not your thing, if you want something super, super new and original, then a lot of the tropes and things like that are things that you've seen many times before. But the world itself I found really fascinating. I was able to really visualize it. I even bought a freaking t-shirt that says the War College's name on it. I'm now matching with Lauren. Like, we have gone a little far in our obsession with this series. I don't even own an ACOTAR t-shirt, okay? But it's consumed me, you know? And I really, really enjoyed this book. I feel like I haven't really talked about much to do with this book because I don't want to spoil a whole lot, and I feel like there's a lot of this book that's wrapped up within each other. But if you like fantasy romance, if you like a very dark, mysterious main male character, if you like a lot of those dark romance vibes when it comes to the main male character, if you like dragons, if you find, you know, war in a book not the worst thing to read about, which is not something I usually enjoy and was fine in this one, all of those things, then you will enjoy this book. I think if you are interested in what the plot is for this book, then you should give it a chance, because yes, it's really, really hyped right now. Yes, some people may think it is overhyped, but I think if you are remotely interested in this book, then you will enjoy it. So that's my 2 cents on Fourth Wing and why I'm obsessed with it and why it's my new personality. And I can't wait for the sequel to come out, which should be coming out in November. I've already got a book. I'm buddy reading with Lauren. We're going to read it in November. I'm so excited. I love it. It was really good. The next book that I ended up picking up after that one, I decided to go for a little bit of a palate cleanser before I dived into some of my other books that I wanted to read. So I picked up the first volume of Cutie and the Beast, and this is by, Yuhi Azumi, I believe. And this one is one that I've had on my TBR for a while. I picked up not too long ago, I don't think, and I'm obsessed with it. It got 4 stars. This one is a sportsy kind of romance. It follows our 2 main characters. Our female is Momoka, and we've got our main male lead, who is Kuga. Now, Kuga is a wrestler. He's a pro wrestler, and he's very big, as you can probably tell from the cover of this. Most of our main female leads friends like the pretty boy, and she's really interested in him. So, anytime there's a lady who's like interested in a pro wrestler, it's not him, it's one of his friends, and he gets a lot of the dudes that are kind of like fans of his. So she and him have been exchanging, conversing via like this world version of Twitter, and he basically asks her to write him one time, and so she does. She writes him a letter, and then they start talking, they start texting, they meet up a little bit, and so it's their romance. Now, she is in high school and he is not, so there's a little bit of an age gap that's a little questionable, I think, but it's approached in a way that I think makes sense. So I really enjoyed this. I thought their romance was super cute. You do kind of have to go into the story with a little bit of disbelief just because of some of the stuff. The fact that like there is not a single girl that's interested in him. That would not be the case in our society today, I don't think. So there's definitely some stuff here that you do have to kind of like go in with a little bit of disbelief, but I'm really interested in the rest of the series. There are 2 more volumes out of this, and then Goodreads does have a 4th volume with like a little question mark next to it, so I don't know if we're ever going to get that, or if it's like come out in a different, like it's come out in Japan and now we're starting to get the English editions of it. I don't really know, but I'm definitely going to invest in the other 2 in the series because it was super cute. I really enjoyed it. Like it was like Dreaming Sun Volume 1 level of love for this. So I'm really nervous because that didn't go well, but there's only 2 more. So we'll see. It ended on a little bit, no, it ended on a lot of bit of a cliffhanger, and I need answers. So yeah, I really enjoyed this. I thought the story was really, really cute, and the romance was really, really cute, and I just really liked it. They were just so adorable, and I want to read so many more things by them, and the fact that there's only 2 more volumes makes me sad. The next book I picked up was my ARC that comes out, well, it would have come out, I think yesterday, if you're watching this on the day it came out. So this book is already out. If you'd like to check it out, I highly recommend. That is Business or Pleasure by Rachel Lynn Solomon. This is her most recent book, and I had a NetGalley ARC of it, and I was able to finish it at the end of June, obviously. So I'll leave my Goodreads review down below if you'd like to check it out. So this book follows our two main characters, Chandler and Finn, and Chandler is a ghostwriter for like Hollywood stars. Not necessarily Hollywood, but like stars. So at the beginning of the book, she has just finished ghostwriting a book for a content creator who was like a very positive female empowerment kind of person. And so she goes to a book signing for this woman, and this woman has no idea who she is. She doesn't even know the name of her own ghostwriter. And so that really affects Chandler. So she goes to a bar that night and runs to this guy, and they hit it off. They basically spend the entire night together and have a one-night stand that was terrible for her. And so she's like, great, doesn't matter, I'm never going to see him again. She gets an offer to write the next book that she's going to ghostwrite is for a C-list actor who was like a secondary lead in this very popular werewolf teen TV show. And he basically makes his career going through cons, like going to a bunch of different Comic-Cons and things like that. So they're gonna basically pay for her to travel the country with him, and she's like, sure, sounds great. She meets up with them, and it's the guy that she had the one-night stand with, and so they try to have a very professional working relationship until she spills the fact that the one-night stand that he thinks was amazing did not work for her. And so that kind of like spirals with him, and they basically have two working relationships here. They've got the relationship where they're writing the book together, and then they have the relationship where she's teaching him how to have better sex, basically. And it is so fun. I really enjoyed this. One thing I love about this book is the representation within this book. So I will say trigger warnings for panic attacks. That one specifically is on the page, and then talk of an abortion. And then I will say that there is representation because our female lead she suffers from anxiety and he suffers from OCD. So there's a lot of conversation in this book, specifically revolving around him because it is a book about writing a book about him. So we do have a lot of conversations about OCD and family support when it comes to that, and just a lot of stuff, and how it was being an actor in Hollywood with this while he was trying to figure it out, because he did this show when he was relatively young. I mean, they were supposed to be in college, and I think the actors were in their like mid-ish, early to mid-20s when they were doing this, so it was relatively early on in their career. And you see her and him kind of getting to know each other better through writing this book, and it was just so good. I gave it 4 stars. I really enjoyed this book. I really love Rachel Lynn Solomon's writing, and her story development I think is really good. This is the 3rd book I think that I've read by her, and I just adore every book that I've read by her. Has been amazing, and I think this one is the same. I think it is really, really good. I think that this is a very, very sex positive book, which I feel like a lot of romances are sex positive, especially nowadays, but this one, just because of the whole like she's teaching him what to do correctly and what works for her specifically, what works for other people, just kind of like walking him through everything. I think that makes it this very like open conversation between the two of them, and I really liked that. I thought that was really important, and is one that I think a lot of people probably need to have those conversations when it comes to relationships. So her being very open about that was really nice to read about. So I loved it. I thought it was cute. I loved their relationship. The ending did kind of happen rather quickly, which is why I didn't give it a full 5 stars, but I still heavily enjoyed it. And like I said, my Goodreads review is down below if you'd like to check it out. And then I finished off the month with Secrets of a Summer Night by Lisa Kleypas. This is the first in the Wallflower series, but it's the last book in the series that I have not read. Actually, technically, there's a book that's like a prequel in this series that I haven't read yet, but as far as the main 4, I've read everything now, so that's exciting. I did give this one 3 stars though. This one was really interesting to read because I had a very interesting experience. So I listened to this on audiobook while I had the book with me. I was, physically like mixed. I was reading both and listening. And there's some stuff that the audiobook has done, which they've done with the second book in the series as well, that they've taken certain things out. Now, in the second book in the series, it was because there was definitely some questionable things about a couple of scenes, and she wanted to rewrite them to be better, basically to make our main characters better. There was, I think, one scene specifically in the physical book that was not in the audiobook that did, I think was sexual assault on the page, and that was really tough to read. So I understand taking that scene out, but there was definitely some stuff when it came to their romance. Like in this book, there's a prologue, and that prologue is completely taken out of the audiobook, and so any mention of what happens in that prologue is taken out of the audiobook. So I don't know why that part was taken out, because I feel like that gave our characters some sort of backstory, and they felt very 2D to me. Like their romance wasn't the most believable. I like Annabelle as a character. I think she's really, really sweet, and I think she's probably one of my favorite people as far as the Wallflowers to read about, as far as like her character. But the story itself was very two-dimensional. It was very bland. I didn't really believe the romance. It was just kind of okay. I was kind of like reading it to finish it is kind of what ended up happening. But this one really sets up the beginning of the relationship between our 4 main characters throughout this series, and why they became friends, and they call themselves the Wallflowers, and like it's their friendship, and it really starts with them becoming friends. And I loved seeing that. I loved seeing all of the girls before I knew who they end up with, or like now that I know who they end up with, seeing them in here. It definitely sets up the second book really well, so I'm curious to reread the second book, honestly, to see if my feelings about that one has changed now that I know a few things that were definitely mentioned in that one. But the friendship was the best part of this book, which I think is true for the series. I love watching these 4 girls and their friendship and how important they are to each other. And I just really loved that part of it. So that's why it still got 3 stars. The ending was pretty good. It was just like this middle section that felt very iffy. And again, there were some parts that were taken out that I felt like didn't need to be taken out, but I also don't understand what the author was trying to do with certain things. So there might be a reason that those were taken out, because I clearly didn't read them because I was listening to the audiobook. So yeah, it was kind of okay. It's definitely my least favorite in the series, but the others are so strong that that's okay. Did I even tell you what this one's about? Probably not. This one follows Annabelle, who is from a family that is basically about to become destitute. And so she really, really needs to find a husband who is willing to marry her because she has no dowry. And of course, not many people are going to marry her for no dowry. And so a lot of the men are just kind of waiting around because they know that at some point in the future, they're going to run out of money and she's going to be willing to become someone's mistress. And so that's what our main character, Simon, is here. He really, really wants her to become his mistress. And so they have met many times throughout the season, and he is definitely a scoundrel of sorts, a rake, if you will, and he really wants her, just specifically her. So yeah, I did enjoy my time reading this. It still got 3 stars because there was a lot of elements to the story that I enjoyed, but overall, just kind of okay. But I finally finished the series, which is exciting. And that is one of 2 books, at least, that I read from my summer TBR that I read in June. So that's very exciting. And I did start a 3rd one, but I didn't quite finish it until July. So I'm actually making progress on that summer TBR, which is exciting. And that's a look at my books that I read in June. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. As always, let me know if you've read any of the books that I mentioned in today's video. I would love to know your thoughts on those. Or if there's something that you read in June that you just absolutely loved and want to rave about tell me all your bookish thoughts down below, of course. But if you liked this video, and I very much hope that you did, don't forget to give it a big thumbs up and subscribe down below if you'd like to be part of this awesome growing family. I've also got all my social media down there, as well as other fun bookish links, so check all that out, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye!